All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Amy Pope, and I'm the coordinator of special events for the Auburn Alumni Association. Welcome to session 4. It's been a great day. And today we are going to hear from Kath Carter about the power of personal brand and negotiation skills. In our current role as the Ernst & Young Global Talent Leader, Strategy and Transactions, Kath focuses on inspiring and developing the talent for today and the future to achieve their aspirations and growth potential in this ever-changing environment, while also building a better working world. Just a reminder, you are automatically muted, but you can put your questions and comments in the group chat, and we will get to as many as we can have time for at the end. Kath, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Amy. I am super excited to be here. So first off, a big thank you to Amy and Aaron, to all those involved. Secondly, I will just give you a little bit of a warning that I do have a puppy who is in the room with me. I know you can't see her because of my background. However, if a dog starts to bark, that would be mine. I am in Nashville today and we're having some storms here. She gets a little nervous. So just, you know, we're all used to this environment right now. So let's just go with the flow. So again, a big thank you. I'm super excited to be here. It really is an honor and a privilege to spend time with all of you, although it's virtually, and I really can only see Amy right now. So it's great to see or to know that you're there. And I have to admit, I was a little surprised when I was asked not to present, but when I was asked to present on this topic. You know, this topic about personal branding and negotiation skills. In fact, when I first submitted the proposal and what, you know, the write-up that could be used, I actually only put half of it in. And Aaron quickly came back to me and said, no, I think you're going to talk about two things, personal branding and negotiation skills. So I was, the more I noodled on it, I was thinking, you know what, I was really hesitant because my background in education is in neither, right? And so I was like, what could I possibly bring to the table to this conversation on what I consider to be two really important subjects. But as I thought about it, I realized that I took a 7-year plan to get my college education, and while I might not be book smart on these topics, after 30 plus years since my graduation in 1990, I do realize that I've probably accumulated some street smarts on both of these topics, and some of those have come the hard way. So as I said, I'm excited to be here because I'm confident now that you are going to walk away with some tidbits from the School of Hard Knocks that I'm going to share with you. And one of the little things that I'm going to let you know is this truly is going to be from my heart. I thought about researching books and getting what those tips of advice they would give to others. And I thought, you know what, the more I did realize my 30-year journey, that I had some firsthand experience in both. And that I am actually contacted frequently on both. One of the things that I thought was a good sign was this Monday, I actually had a woman who got on my calendar because she wanted to talk about several things. And indeed, one of those things that was high on her list was the topic of personal branding and how had I done what I had done. And then on Tuesday, I actually had a gentleman who was in a panic because he was afraid he was going to be losing his job and was thinking about, oh my gosh, what should I be thinking about at a time like this? And so he wanted some advice on negotiation. And so I was like, well, if those aren't two signs that I should feel good about coming on and talking about this. Last night, as I was doing some final prep, rewriting everything to be less about book smart and to be more about street smart. Last night, as I was working on it, I actually put on Netflix. You know, I love to have a little bit of background in there, and what it was suggesting for me to put on was Brene Brown's, Call to Courage, and I thought, oh, that is just exactly the right thing for me. I had seen it before, but I thought, how great would it be to actually listen to it again in the background, and it talks about being vulnerable. And I thought, how appropriate, if those aren't three good signs that I should be exactly here today with all of you, I don't know what could be more profound. So let's start with some personal branding. And let me take you back to part of my career history. And I won't go all the way back to 1990 when I graduated. I will go back to 2008. And in 2008, that was when I was actually accepted. So I made partner in 2003 at EY at Ernst & Young. And in 2008, I had just accepted my first leadership role. And it was shortly after I accepted my first leadership role that I noticed that I was indeed getting more and more requests to have discussions about personal branding and how I had getting advice on how I had gone about getting my own personal brand, et cetera. And I thought, I wasn't even sure what my personal brand was. So how was I going to possibly give advice to this generation that now saw me as a leader with a personal brand? And so I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. Let me ponder this for a moment before I start to give advice. But it was very obvious that there was a definite shift once I'd gone into the leadership role about that. And I noticed that that was the same year, a little bit later on in the year, we actually gave an award 2008 was the last year we gave an award to men and women who were strong proponents for women in business. And I had received that award that year. That was the first year, that I'd received it. And so I was like, I wonder if this is part of my brand, that I was actually creating a brand that I hadn't realized. However, I do honestly believe that when the people first started asking me about the personal branding question, the real question that they wanted to know was, how did you, of all the people that were in the firm, within our service line, how were you the candidate that was selected to become the Midwest leader, right? Like, how did you get that brand? How were you known? How did you get on that list? I was a long shot, I am sure, to be on that list. And yet I was the one that actually had gotten the role. And so I'll tell you, that really came down to some good advice from one of my female mentors. And so let me take you back a little bit further. So again, I got this first role in April of 2008. And to digress for a moment, if you know, I'm with Ernst & Young. I'm in our strategies and transactions practice. I think we all know what happened in August of 2008 with the financial crisis. I had just taken on this leadership role in April. So that's a whole nother story that I won't get into today, but you can imagine some of the topics we could discuss about being in leadership during a crisis. So in 2006 timeframe, so before I took this leadership role, in 2006, our transactions leader had come to me, and we had a huge initiative that we were working on as it related to the mega private equity funds. And those, just as my background, there were about 21 mega private equity funds at the time across the globe. 16 of those were located in New York. I was being asked to move from Chicago to New York to actually take on two of these mega private equity funds with $5 billion in excess. And so as I was contemplating that, I had a couple of things that I needed to do, right? I needed to think about the move from Chicago to New York. So I was in a negotiation period as well. Was working on a personal brand that said that women can work in private equity. So that was going on as well. And so I accepted the challenge, and I went to New York to work on these mega private equity funds. However, one of the things that we never could quite work out in the early days, so sometime in 2006, I went there thinking we were going to have a great negotiation about my move and whatnot. And that didn't actually come into play because it took from mid-2006 until November 2007 for us to actually iron out all the details related to my move. So again, we're going to have two examples in one here, because the personal brand is going to come into play, and as is the negotiation. So I'll get to the negotiation second. In the first part, though, when I first got to New York, it was really hard. I'm not going to lie. It was hard for a woman for me to be there. It was hard. They put me on a floor that didn't even have the same service line that I was working with. I have an interior senior manager office. I didn't get to know a lot of people. I didn't know a lot of people already there. So it was a rough time for me. And I remember I reached out to one of my mentors and I said, I'm kind of struggling to fit in. And first of all, it's hard enough to be a woman working in private equity. Secondly, it's really hard when you don't know anybody that you're working with. And so, one of the things that she asked me, one of her questions was, well, do you know our service line vice chair? Do you know? She was in the same service line as I was at one point in her career. And she said, do you know your service line vice chair? He's right there in New York with you. Do you know him? And I'm like, no, I don't know him. And her advice was, well, get on his calendar. I thought, You want me to reach out to our vice chair of all these thousands of people? You want me to just like say, hey, hi, I'm here. Get on his calendar. She said, yes, I do. She said, I want you to just spend time, get on his calendar. She said, because if you don't, he can't help you. And your name surely isn't going to be on any list to get any other role that's going to get you out of New York. So yeah, I'm encouraging you to get on his calendar. So I have to tell you, that was really probably one of the most uncomfortable things for me to do, because that is not the way I go about networking. I love to network. I love people. I love being in groups. I love building teams. I love to do all that. So don't get me wrong about that aspect of it. I just prefer that it comes naturally and it comes organically. You happen to meet someone and you have a connection, and then it builds from there. To do it for the sole purpose of furthering my career was a hard pill for me to swallow. However, it was some really good advice, and I trusted this mentor. So I actually did it. I got on our vice chair's calendar. I spent 15 minutes. I never tried to take too much time. I knew he was busy, but I wanted to actually say, just for him to get to know me. And with each opportunity, I wanted to ensure that I was having him think of me differently, having him think of me for opportunities that could come my way. So I tried not to impose too much on his time, while at the same time making the best of it for both of us and getting to know him as well. And then it worked. Let me just say that it worked, because in as I said, in April of 2008, they asked me to take on the Midwest leadership role, which I would have never been considered for had I not gotten out of my own way or out of my own comfort zone to do so. So now that sort of helped set me up for this brand that I started to form, where I realized, getting on the calendar, I started to get known, and I was starting to create a personal brand that I had drive and ambition and a willingness to learn, and I wanted to do more things, and I wanted to grow with the firm. So that was part of that branding. And at the same time, I think I mentioned that I hadn't worked through my move negotiation. So I was actually sleeping on a friend's couch from mid 2006 until November 2007. I was sleeping on a friend's couch, and I was working in the office. And I had just assumed that this negotiation would be relatively easy because the firm had asked me to, right? So I knew I was coming from a position of leverage, or I thought I was coming from a position of leverage, because they were asking me to move to New York. However, what I didn't realize is that, and remember, it was also in line with this huge initiative, 16 private equity funds. We were moving about 100 people at the time to New York to focus on these large private equity funds. And so I thought, oh, this is, I couldn't believe that this negotiation was going on and on. However, what they had wanted to negotiate with me was that they wanted me to do the cost of living adjustment as if I was moving to Connecticut or New Jersey and not New York. And part of that was because most of the people that they were moving in to New York at the time happened to be males with families. And so most of those people actually did want to move into Connecticut or New Jersey, or they were fine in moving there because of their family situation. Well, I was a single woman at the time and didn't really have a desire to move to either. And one of the things that we have as sort of a standard is that they put you into, the general standard in the moving package would be that you would be able to replicate where you were coming from a standard of living for a home there. Well, I live in downtown Chicago at the time. And so to live in downtown New York or in the heart of New York was a pretty expensive situation for them. So long story short on that one, I learned the art of negotiation on that quite well and quite distinctive, because they didn't realize that I would be willing to live on a couch for that many months to actually get what I wanted from the way of compensation and living style, et cetera. And so we did go back and forth. Ultimately, and a good thing that we did go back and forth in the long run, because if you remember, I was only there about a year and a half before they actually asked me to move back to Chicago. So I'm not sure if that was just dumb luck or not. But however, what we ended up doing is I ended up negotiating a corporate apartment. And so they didn't have to pay for a move. And that was good for them because they didn't have to, in those days, you'd sell the house and you'd be made whole for the house that was sold, et cetera. And so it was actually turned out to be a win because I kept my home in Chicago. I got a corporate, fully furnished, brand new corporate apartment, 10 blocks from our New York office, great view of the Hudson, floor to ceiling windows with a great view of the Hudson. And by the way, my pup's name is Hudson now. I'm not sure how that came to be either, but it all comes back together. And so I ended up in a really great place in that I lived where I wanted to live. I don't like to commute. And so that was really important to me. And I wanted to make sure that I was safe. I was in a safe environment and I enjoyed my surroundings. And so in those negotiations, I also negotiated a minimum raise. So when we, as partners in a firm, we get a true up at the end of every year. So I was moving off cycle, as we call it. And so I wanted to make sure that because I had moved to New York for these reasons that and our raises are never guaranteed. The percentages aren't, like, none of that's guaranteed. And so I wanted to make sure, though, during this situation that this was a good deal for me to make my move from Chicago to New York. So I negotiated that as well as part of this whole move. And so when I looked back on it, there were certain things that I knew were sort of non-negotiables for me as part of this move. And that's why I said I was willing to live on a couch for several months, if that was the case, in order to make sure that I got exactly what I wanted and that it turned out to be a win-win for the firm. And I did. And so I would say that, again, knowing what you want is a bit of advice, knowing what you want and knowing what your non-negotiables are. What are those true things that you couldn't live without? Because I was flexible in certain things. Obviously, I didn't end up buying a home. While I might have wanted to move into a real home, I didn't buy a home in New York. I was willing to live in a 750 square foot apartment, by the way, 750 square. So I went from 3,000 to, it wasn't exactly identical, but it was close enough for me for the time, especially since I didn't give up my Chicago home and was able to commute. That was part of the agreement, as well as they would pay for me to fly back and forth so that I could stay in my Chicago home and avoid, is that the right word? Avoid. I did not want to become a New York resident because I did not want to have to pay New York taxes. So we were able to, that was all part of the negotiations. How much would I actually be in New York? How much would I actually be out of New York, wherever that may have been, so that I wouldn't have to pay taxes in New York City taxes. So one of the other things that I failed to mention is that the person's couch that I would happen to be sleeping on actually was my mentor. And so she was truly, I give her all the credit. She was truly instrumental throughout all those days of, late night discussions about this move, the stress of the move, the stress of the negotiation. And, again, she was the one that said, think of what's most important to you. Know your non-negotiables, aim high. She always say this, aim high, because if you don't aim high, you're not going to get it. And somebody else is going to be aiming high. So you should too. Aim high because you're worth it. I loved that when she said, aim high, Kath, because you're worth it. And know your non-negotiables, but also, figure out a way that they feel good. That was her advice to me. And that's why I realized that with this one example, and I did it in 2000, I actually have used that advice all throughout some of my others. I've thought about leaving EY or have been tempted, people have tried to tempt me to leave EY. And each and every time that I've thought about it, I always came back to some of these same principles. And one of the other pieces of advice that she gave me, and I find myself even a week ago with one of our women who's negotiating a contract, one of the pieces of advice that she gave me was get it in writing. So if you're up for an internal move, or oftentimes if we're going to a new employer, they're giving us a contract or they're giving us an offer. And so if they're not, right, if it's a handshake, or in my case, they didn't want to put it in writing, it was just, I was part of the firm, and so they didn't need to put it in writing. And she said, oh no, you need to get it in writing. And so I did. And I will tell you, I tried to get them to actually give it to me in writing in the form of a contract, and they didn't want to do that because it was internal, and I understood that. So I actually ended up just writing it, a recap, just saying, here's what I believe we've agreed to. Let me know. And I did all the various points. Let me know if there's anything I've misunderstood. Otherwise, I will assume that this is, we are in agreement. And it's really a good thing that I did, because in September of, well, I'll get my years wrong, but in September of the year when we were actually doing the comp increases, my mentor is not only my friend, she was also on the Americas board, which for EY, which was even better, because she went into the soundings, and our partners get their soundings all at one time, where they go through every partner in the firm, and we talk about their compensation, et cetera. And I remember during that day, she sent me a ping. She texted me. She said, "Hey, did you actually negotiate your comp for this first year out, your first year here, because you wanted to make sure that it was a significant increase to be worthy of this move, et cetera?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, do you happen to have that? Do you happen to have that email that where it was agreed to?" And so I was able to find that email, thank goodness, because she said, "Because you know what, your vice chair has had selective memory. He didn't bring it up at all." So that was never part of the dialogue, was my compensation. That, again, of all the things that we were negotiating, compensation was critical to me. And so I was really thankful for her. What was even better about it is, once I sent the email, the Americas board felt really bad that the vice chair had selective memory or had completely forgotten, not sure what exactly was the situation, was on purpose or not. And they actually gave me even more. And that was because they knew that I had to be part of the process, right? They knew that my mentor had to come to me to get the email. And so they felt bad and said, "You know what, that's not the type of, we don't want her to feel that way. We value her." And so my comp increase was even more than I had thought it would be. So it was a win. That was a win-win, I think. Again, aim high, we're worth it, and know your breaking point. And so I'll just step back, because one of the things that I've always heard is that we remember things if we hear it 7 times. So I'm going to try and say the same things. I probably won't get to 7 for it. However, I will reiterate it. And that is, in this one example, that 2006 to the 2008 timeframe in my life, for the personal branding, getting out of your comfort zone, right? Be known by the people who can influence the decisions. Be your authentic self when you're doing this too. So while it was difficult for me to get on his calendar when I was with him, when I spent time with my vice chair, I was absolutely my authentic self in that conversations that we were happening. And then when it comes to negotiating, aim high, you're worth it. Know your breaking point, or what your non-negotiables are. And if you can, figure out a way to have some flexibility so everybody feels like there's some give and take, and it's a win-win. I'm going to come back to these because that's the second time I've said them for both those. So now let's go back to some more of my journey, because remember, I said that in 2008, when I took this Midwest leadership role, that I was realizing this whole personal brand, because people were starting to ask me more about it. And so I thought, while I hadn't actually gone to find out what my personal brand was at this point in time, I did realize that what I was saying and doing, right, my actions were forming my personal brand. Getting time on a calendar was forming my personal brand. And it was then that I thought, you know what, I might want to figure out exactly what my personal brand is. So I had one of those those 360 feedbacks, right? I wanted to find out, to find out what people really did think about me. And so I could find out what my brand was from their perspective, because I knew what I was hoping my brand would be. And I wanted to see if there was a disconnect. And so I had the 360 degree feedback done. And when it came back, I have to tell you, when it first came back, I was similar to when I was asked to do this presentation. I was a little taken aback, because the two things that came back was that I was very competitive, and I was a fierce advocate for my people, both male and female. And it's not hard to realize that, the second one, I was extremely glad that that's what came back, that I was a fierce advocate for our people, both male and female, because as you may recall, I had won, that was the year that I had been awarded the Rosemary Meshie Award. And I thought, oh, maybe they think I'm all about women. And I really wanted to have a brand that was at the time for all people, right? I was in a new leadership role and I didn't want people to think that I was playing favorites. So I was really happy that that brand came back, that I'm a strong advocate, fierce. It was actually a fierce advocate for our people. However, the first one, when they told me I was very competitive, I have to tell you, when I first heard that, I was not too sure how I actually felt about being called competitive, right? Would my mom be glad that I was called competitive? And so I had to, similar to what I do a lot, is I noodle on things, I reflect on them. I actually asked my successor, can you believe, I told him I was surprised that they had come back, that I was competitive. And he said, really, Kath? He said, the firm asked you to do a dance with the Chicago celebrities on behalf of breast cancer, and you raised 143,000 in 4 weeks, when the most ever raised before that by any one person was less than $10,000. He said, do you think you're not competitive? And I was like, well, yeah, when it's raising money for a great cause because my sister's battling cancer, of course I'm competitive. Well, of course I want to do all I can. However, it did make me realize that he had a point. And the more I thought about it, the more I actually embraced the fact that I was a woman competing in a private equity. Of course I had to be competitive to be able to do that. And I am an avid workout fan, and people know that. And so that with that comes the connotation that I like to compete. And what I also realized about myself is that while I like to compete for the most time, when I'm competing, when it's working, in working out, I'm competing against myself, and I'm competing to be my best self. And I'm okay with that. And when I'm being a fierce advocate for our people, and when I'm in a leadership role, I am fiercely competitive in helping us to build a team and to be the best that we can be as a we thing, that we are better together. We had t-shirts made that we are better together one year, and we had the next year we had t-shirts made that said lift us, we climb. And so as I started to think about, again, remember those actions and what my personal brand was becoming, yeah, I did. I wanted our Midwest team to be the best across the globe. I wanted us I wanted everybody to do well. As a firm, I wanted us all to do well. I just wanted our Midwest team to be just slightly better in any category that you could have looked at. And so I would, while it was shocking when I first heard it, it realized that I was really embracing that this was my personal brand, and I had not consciously gone about doing so at the time. It was just that my actions and words were reinforcing my personal brand. So when it comes to personal brand, that is what I would say is, are you aligning your actions and words with what you want your personal brand to be? And that is something that I now take very seriously. And so when I'm looking at social media, or when I'm thinking about posts, or things that I want to put in writing, or things that I want to say on air, like today, I want to make sure that I'm actually being true, true to that personal brand. And for me, I've refined it a bit over the years. I will say that my brand probably now is even more so about being an advocate for women. Still want to be an advocate for all. However, particularly coming out of the pandemic, when I know that women have been more negatively impacted than men, there's no doubt that I want to be a strong advocate for women, internally, externally. I'm our entrepreneurial winning women global leader. And so of course I want to make sure that women in business, women who want to be entrepreneurs, are getting that opportunity and access to capital to be all that they want to be and aspire to be. So while I'm still a fierce advocate, I would say, even now more so than ever, it is for women. It is for all of you on this call. And so that's near and dear to my heart. And again, as it relates to personal brand, you don't have to be everywhere or doing everything. In fact, what I would say is sometimes having a voice on everything can actually hurt your personal brand, because people aren't sure what you stand for. And so think about that when you're in meetings and you're wanting to make sure that you're having your dialogue. Think about where you want to pick and choose your battles, and where do you want to have that strong voice, because you will get known for your voice and when you strengthen it. So I'm just going to do a real quick time check because I realized that I have a lot of stories. I've been in this business for, as I said, 30 plus years. So I have a lot of stories. I've witnessed a lot of things. As I mentioned already, I almost left EY 4 times over the course of my 23 years there. I've been in other roles. This is not my first job, although I know you probably think it. This is not my first role. I actually was in auditing, and then I went and did mergers and acquisitions for a publicly traded company as well. So I've had to negotiate both at EY and outside of EY as well. However, I will say that in every one of those times, every one of those opportunities that I've had the ability to negotiate, I think it still comes back to these things that we will recap again. I won't recap them quite yet, but it still comes back to the same things. I so appreciate what my mentor told me way back when, and all those years ago, because every time I've gone on to a negotiation since then, I've thought the same things and ensuring, are you getting in writing? And as I advise others now, I say to them, are you getting in writing? And so, I think as we talked about, especially when it comes to negotiation, you have to think about your non-negotiables. Is it title over salary? Is it both, right? Do you really want one? Or if you really had to be flexible, which would it be? Would you want more holiday time? Would you work a compressed work week? We're having a lot of discussions now about how do we make it a 4-day work week, because people are used to working from home. Some may still want to work from home. They feel they're working more hours. They don't want to work as many days. And so think about what flexibility means to you without having to take a pay cut or an impact on your pay because of that flexibility. So those are some things for questions that you may have about what are your non-negotiables, right? Where do you go? I remember some years ago, I was asked to recruit someone. I will share one more story here that sort of brings some things to life. I was asked to recruit someone who was going to actually work for me. Right. So this was when I was leading the Midwest, and this person was going to come work for me. I was managing about 220 plus people. This person was going to have a really small fraction of those people. And it was a man that they wanted to pay more money than they were actually paying me. And I had a really hard time with that. And I was surprised that my firm couldn't understand that I would have a hard time with that, right? So here I was, the leader of the Midwest, going to hire a partner that was going to make more money than I was. So I decided to find out and this is the advice I gave to the gentleman yesterday, find out your market value, right? Find out how, it does a lot of things for you when you actually go out and find out your market value. So I went out, I got an offer from another company that, was a competing company, and was a great offer. It was an opportunity to be the first woman CEO of a non-Big Four. It was a great opportunity for me, and I brought it back to them. And when we went through the process, they obviously didn't want to lose me, and realized how important it was to me that they had basically said, you're of less value than someone who is coming off the street. And they knew me and the heart that I brought to the work, and that we were going to pay this man more than they paid me. And so we actually got to a great agreement. And this is where I showed my flexibility. I said, listen, I wasn't thinking of a raise at the time that this happened. I thought I was well compensated, et cetera. So rather than giving me a raise today, how about if we get me to this level over the course of a 2-year period? So half of it at the end of year 1 and half of it at the end of year 2, which was still probably more than if I had stayed, which was definitely more than if I had stayed in my role without having those conversations. It was a greater percentage, a higher raise than I would have gotten if I had just stayed at status quo. And the real deal is I didn't want to leave, right? I was hoping that we could come to an agreement where I felt valued and I felt it was a win-win for them, because as exciting as that opportunity was, I really didn't want to leave EY. I was just hurt. I was demotivated, as we always say. Money can't always motivate you, but can definitely demotivate you. And the great news is we didn't hire that man either. So I feel that it was truly a win-win all the way around, that I was able to negotiate a better raise than I otherwise would have. But sadly, I do see this all still too often with women and their ability to put themselves forward with the same confidence as our male counterparts do on their value, on their personal brand, on their negotiating style, etc. I still see that far too often, and we hear it far too much when, in the roundtables at year end when we're talking about our personnel. And now I have to tell you, I wear that competitive and ambitious brand with a lot of badge of honor, and I try to help others say it is okay to be you. And if you are competitive, if you are a strong, independent woman, it's great to be that, because we still have a ways to go. The gender pay gap, which has gotten somewhat better, is still not great, right? We're at about 80 cents on the dollar, I think, here in the US with our male counterparts. And I love this reminder too. Before the pandemic, I recall having a conversation with a mentor of mine who was at EY, had just retired, and he was sort of getting personal about where I was in my compensation. And I shared with him where I was, and he said, Kath, no matter how much they pay you, remember you are worth every penny, and don't ever let them think you feel you aren't worth what you are being paid. And always think about more. He's like, just don't ever let them think, oh, here's I'm satisfied. So I remember that, and I look back on that fondly, because it was great advice. Because oftentimes we as women will say, oh, it's not about the compensation, or it's not, I feel like I'm fairly valued. And so I just thought it was great advice coming from a man to a woman to say, hey, you're worth every penny. So I think that's one of the things that, as you're thinking about your situations. And I can't read the chats. I can see some chats coming in. I do hope that some of them are questions or comments. I will hopefully get to read them, because I'm really just trying to make sure that I look at the clock and make sure we get all of this in. One of the things in my new role as talent leader, which is a recent role that I took on for our strategy and transactions practice, is I always talk about creating muscle memory, right? So you heard me say you have to say something 7 times. And so again, I am going to try and create muscle memory by saying it here for the 3rd time. This will be my last time for the day to talk about. So when it comes to your personal brand, figure out the small number of things you want to be known. And I'd say that, 3 to 4, 1 to 2, whatever, if you feel really passionate about things, small number of things. Get the feedback to find out what you are known. How do people perceive you? How you want to be known and how people perceive you, are those in alignment? And then ensure that you are aligning your words and actions to truly come up with a deliberate personal brand, right? For you, get out of your comfort zone and be authentic. Those are my tips on the personal brand. And when it comes to negotiating, here they are. You've heard this. This is the 3rd time. I'm hoping if I asked you some of these, you could actually give me feedback without having to hear it 7 times. Aim high, because you are worth it. Know your non-negotiables, whatever your breaking points might be. Be ready to give a little to make it a win-win. So that's why you have to aim high, if you're going to have to give a little as well. Put it in writing, recap it if it isn't in a contract already, and make sure that if it is a contract, that they're very specific on all the details that are important to you. And then finally, I would say celebrate you for the strength of actually finding the fortitude and for standing firm for what you believe in. Celebrate you. One last thing, as we are celebrating Women's History Month and International Women's Day, which goes on, I say we should celebrate women every day. And I do celebrate women every day. I did have the opportunity. We had an EY. EY was one of the sponsors on International Women's Day for WeBank, and we were asked to come up with our EY challenge, and I got to be the representative to do so. And if you don't know about our where we are all about better questions. Ask a better question, get a better, better questions give you better answers, etc. And so we did our challenge in a form of a better question, and our better question was, how can one woman's vision change the lives of thousands? My answer on that day, and it is still the same today, is that by amplifying your voice for yourself and for others, and then encouraging others to do the same, just think of the ripple effect that we could cause. Amplify your voice, that next time a woman gets makes a suggestion and gets ignored, and 5 minutes later, which just happened a week ago, which is why I bring this up, and then 5 minutes later a man makes the same suggestion to accolades. Amplify your voice and say, that was a great idea when so and so said it 5 minutes ago. Amplify your voice when you're looking at the vendor list and they don't include women entrepreneurs. That is my timer, so I know I've got to start to wrap it up. Amplify your voice every time there is a next time, right? If we amplified our voice every time we have the opportunity to do so, we really would be able to impact the lives of thousands, as we not only make a seat at the table, we fill the seat at the table with more and more women. And with that, I wanted to allow some time for Q&A, et cetera. Amy, back to you.
Oh my God.
How do we do on timing?
Yes, you're doing great. And this has been such great information. I was just thinking, I'm so glad we're recording all of this, because I think all of us might go back and just rewatch for all the great advice that you gave. We do have some questions for you. One of which is, do you have any advice for a young woman who recently took a leadership role, but everyone else on the leadership team is male? Where do I seek mentorship within the company?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say a couple of things about that. So not all my mentors have been male. You heard me say that, right? So I don't know how comfortable you feel. And again, organically, if there's somebody on that team already that you can realize that you have a connection with, I would try and get a male mentor on that team. And then I would also say, look outside. If you really are the only female leader at the top and you can't figure out any of those men, then I would say, look outside and call me. I go to several women outside and men, several men and women outside of EY, because I always want that other outside perspective as well. And sometimes when you're getting mentoring, it's hard to do it, when you're having a conversation with people that are right there at the table. And sometimes you actually need to have somebody's internal perspective to address the mentorship that's at hand. So I would say, don't limit yourself to one mentor, because you can learn lots of different things from different people.
Okay, and then we have another question. In your opinion, is your brand defined by what you stand by and believe in, or does the brand you desire to become define what you represent?
Ooh, that's a great question. Which comes first, the chicken or the egg, right? Like, I think, and as I said what I realized for me, I was forming a brand and not realizing it by my actions, right? So if you aren't forming that brand by your actions, then you really do, you have to think about who do you want to become. And which is why I said, even for me, as I pivoted and I said, I want to have a stronger voice for women, right? I really do. I wanted to be known at a certain point in my career for being fair to all. However, I also wanted to be known that if a man and a woman were the same on paper, that I was going to be the one to pick the woman, because not enough of us are doing that. So I do believe that it is a bit of a combination depending upon where you are. I do think if you're without thinking about it, your actions are going to form your brand without you even realizing it. And so if there's a brand that you want to have, you can deliberately go about achieving that.
Kath, thank you so much. We are about out of time. Like I said, all these sessions are being recorded. So if you had to drop out or you want to share with friends or coworkers, please be sure to visit our website, and you will be able to access all this amazing information that we have had all day today. This day has just flown by for me. We really appreciate you being here, Kath, and providing such empowering information about creating our own brand. I know everyone got a lot out of this session, including myself. So thank you so much for taking the time. We are actually going to start our closing session at 3. So please don't miss out. It's going to be a wonderful way to end this day. And again, thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you guys soon.
Thanks, everyone.